Welcome to Inside Plug, the podcast where independent creators and entrepreneurs connect and inspire. I'm your host, Devon Jones. Today on our show, we have Michael Macaskill. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I checked out your portfolio and I love the films that you have worked on, and especially I love the one that you shared with me. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But before we jump into your film projects, Michael, as a filmmaker, when did you decide that filmmaking wanted to be a career that you wanted to pursue?
Um, I think it's a bit of a complex one, but I think when I really knew, because I think when I was growing up, I was always into film. I think like every filmmaker says that really, we're always passionate and into film. But I think when I was really young, I was really into the idea of like being an actor, and I think I was doing drama at school, but only like a small amount, and I think it was clear that I wanted to at least contribute something and, put some sort of creative outlet in that because I would also like write in my spare time, sort of like scripts and short stories and things like that. So I think I knew that I had the creativity and I wanted to put it somewhere. I think film was like this almost magical idea at the time that, when later when I started doing, my studies and picking my options in school and things like that, it kind of like swayed somewhat until much later in life where I just basically there was just a point where I needed a change and needed to like really take stock of what it is that I actually wanted for myself, what would feed my soul ultimately. And I thought, if I want to be in film, if I want to be in TV, why don't I just apply to university, just go for it? I was a mature student and at the time, like in my early 20s, and I just thought like it taking a film degree kind of gets me in that realm. It gets me at least like trying to understand what actually goes in this industry, like what's behind just the creative and the the aspirational element. And I think it was really quickly into my university really where I really figured that like, it seems like there's so much that this film industry or TV industry is about, the creative outlets or the creative opportunities or basically just like what it is that you can do. I was in university for like 4 years and I think it was a real learning experience to really try and figure out, well, what if I am to do this creative thing, what is it that I actually want to say? Where is it that I want to fit within it? And I think it was like when I started, when it really began, it's just when I started writing and sort of preparing my sort of not first film, but it was like first proper like sat down and written and really studied and researched. The subject was stranger to me, and there was something in me that just knew that like if I am to be in film, if I am to contribute, if I am to really try and say something and appreciate like film as an art and myself as trying to be an artist, then I could really take hold of what it is that I actually sort of wanted. So I don't know if that's a long-winded way of saying it, but I think, like, to answer your question, I think it's something that was always ingrained in me. But it was that point in university where I was like, okay, I can identify it now. I love kind of pulpy type of stuff. I love unrepresented stories and identities. I love kind of you know, exploring the depths of films and ideas and stories that I've grown up loving. I think one of my first films that I proper remember watching was well, one of the ones I can remember. I don't know if it was the first. Was Creep Show. Specifically, there's a scene where she's like drinking over the grave of this like curmudgeoned father figure, and his dead hand comes out of the thing. So it's just like I just felt like my brain was full of all of this type of knowledge and need to kind of make something. And having that identifiable thing, you just, yeah, I could see where it could go. You know what I mean?
Awesome, awesome. All right. So you're at the university, you're taking these classes, and then you mentioned Stranger to Me, one of the projects. Could you share us a little bit about that project and how did that concept come about?
Yeah. So basically, like a lot of these ideas kind of start off with a brief, especially with universities. So it was very much like we were given a brief to do a 5 minute film or 10 minute film. And it had to be about like um almost anything we won. I can't remember the brief or the thing that we were given there. But I just it kind of came about because I think at the time I just wanted to make something, and I wanted to make something that I just sort of didn't know anything about. And for a bit of background, Stranger to Me is basically like the log line of the story is this sort of this disconnected and quite sort of forlorn son. He kind of like returns back to his recently deceased father's house, and with the idea to kind of clear everything out, just trash it, get rid of it, get rid of the memories, get rid of all of it. And then realizes along the way that like he finds these articles and artifacts of like this double life that his dad had, this idea that like you know his dad was wearing dresses and potentially doing drag and like had this whole world that he had nothing about, which is why it's called Stranger to Me, because it's it's like reconnecting with that bit that was lost. And yeah, it started off just really thinking about like, well, what is it that I could do practically? What is it that I could do in that space of time that would be a good sort of story that kind of taps into that like father son dynamic, but almost like a father son dynamic where the father isn't necessarily there and it is using whatever tools, to almost personify that person even though he's not there, if that makes sense. Um, and then just I don't know, somewhere it just kind of took on this like LGBTQ element, and then I dove into research on that and kind of really opened my horizons and like a huge world of like drag culture, queer in film. I started getting exposed and reading stuff by like Vito Russo and the Celluloid Closet, which is an astonishing book and documentary, which is basically like uh, obviously because queer culture was illegal and stigmatized and outcast and certainly wasn't allowed in like the boom of Hollywood filmmaking and this that and the other. So it's queer coding is kind of like the reflection or study or realizing that like there's queer elements or queer identities kind of laden in throughout film's history, even though it wasn't allowed. It almost becomes this covert tool for people to express and try and connect and kind of have visibility for these things. And with all that in my research, I was just kind of like, as a personal sort of journey, it really made me kind of challenge myself, which I think made me challenge the text and the story and this discovery element from almost like this, you know, disconnected son's perspective. It just all kind of fitted and fell into place, really.
I like that. I like that. So it's like the film Stranger to Me was kind of more like an experiment, experience, and but then what it did, it actually opened up more doors for you, and now it kind of like led you to you tell me.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Opening doors, because I think there was one. I think the turning point for me, which I think will be quite poignant when we talk about the Pretty in Private. The turning point was there was a particular moment where so it was me and some other people had arranged to do a photo shoot with like a local drag queen, and we was going to take pictures so we could do like props and posters, because part of the narrative is that you have these two characters, this uncle and this son, and they're kind of filtering through all this stuff, like, oh, what the hell's this? Putting it in bags and not really understanding what it's all about until they see these posters of the dad, kind of like in this very feminine and this very like drag and very queer, like overt identity sort of spilled out in these posters. So we had booked this drag queen to come in to this little studio that we'd booked out, and literally the night before they dropped out. So my team at the time was kind of texting me going, oh shit, we've got no one, we've got all the kit, we've got the room. And I just, for me personally, I'm kind of a person where it's like, if it all falls apart, then fuck it, I'll do it myself. So I spent like all night shaving my legs and painting my nails, and like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna wear this stuff. I think within that, it was just a real door opening thing that has impacted everything that has happened after. Because I think I realized the comfort and the sort of the principles behind a lot of not what necessarily these clothes and these dresses and these articles were, but like the sort of the representational value that I think that in the story I was trying to look for. And I think it strengthened that element of like, this isn't just about some guy who, he's no longer around, he's got dresses all around, and he's like, oh, it's interesting. Because this stigmatizes, the stigmatization of stuff like that anyway. But it's like, this is about, what do these things represent? They represent an identity that was hidden away. What does that hidden identity represent? And yeah, and like I said, it was another turning point, because I think for the rest of my university, and certainly now, I've really taken that to stride. I think that sort of, now the doors are open, let's see what we can actually bring into the material, and into my own sort of life and identity as well.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. That is commitment where, everyone kind of dropped out and then you just like, fuck it. I gotta just, do it myself. I just gotta go in. Cause like once you have this vision in mind, you have to follow it all the way through, regardless of,
Yeah,
whether the people are there or not.
yeah,
I love that.
that's it. Like sometimes it's just like, like I can always have like a bit of a bitch and a moan, and like, there can always be something, there's more time or more things, or but I think like sometimes just gritting your teeth and going through, just like that moment, we would have had nothing if I hadn't, and maybe my outlook would have been completely different if I hadn't have done it.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you threw in there that, you'll touch in a little bit more about Pretty in Private, because as you were telling me this story, I had Pretty in Private in mind just because you shared it with me, and I'm kind of like
Yeah.
curious on how the connection with that. But before we jump into that one, let's talk about this other project you worked on called Short Tooth.
Okay, so Short Tooth is a bit of a weird one, because it was my final year project at university, and I think that it was a bit of an awkward time, and there was dissertations. I had a massive dissertation like breaking down the male gaze and basically like trying to break it. um as well as, yeah, there was lots of stuff going on. So basically what it was is, it was a neo-realist vampire story, but it was going to be like it was going to be black-centered male vampire character, with this whole story of, basically it's him having a midlife crisis and really trying to sort of fit himself in this modern world. Because there's the idea that vampires exist in today's society, almost integrated as something very, very normal, but within it they still kind of like suffer the same sort of social constraints and sort of socialization that we have now. And it was kind of him just trying to, like, get into a point, a bit of not a failed actor, but a kind of downtrodden actor, just kind of going, look, I'm a vampire, I don't feel like a vampire, what do I do? Where do I go? This is meant to be forever. Like it was very much like that. Um, and I think the intention behind that was, again, it was looking at taking the vampire sort of narratives that I'd grown up with, like, Salem's Lot, or maybe a bit like A Vampire's Kiss or Fright Night. These classic interpretations of vampires throughout history. I did a lot of research into, like, what vampires ultimately represent throughout history and literature as well, especially like the racial undertones, because one of the motivators is that you don't really see many like main leads or who are just black male vampires. A lot of them tend to be very white focused, and I was just sort of like, other than Blade and some other examples I can think of, it's just I go, well, why not just write this very deep and complex and very almost human type of vampire character set in this very real world that suffers from the same sort of anxieties that humans do, but you know, with this element of he's a vampire as well. And as I'm saying it, it sounds quite ambitious. It sounds quite big, and I think that was what I was suffering at the time. But what I ended up doing was, again, gritting my teeth and making sure it was done. Kind of doing some filming, but then integrating the storyboard like drawings that I'd done in it. So it kind of works just to just deliver that feel and that vibe of what it was that I was giving. But it's by no means like an actual film. The the post production of that was intense, because I another thing I was trying to do at the time was really sink into the feel of certain films, because I really love 60s and 70s like counterculture, like rustic and raw. It's just even the grain in the actual like quality of the film kind of adds a bit of character, which is carries over to Pretty in Private. But with that, I really sunk into just trying to get as close to like 8mm type of quality of um film, and almost trying to make it in a sort of way like, what if there was different film elements to it? Like, what if some of it, with him being an actor, what if it had this very rustic like 90s exploitation kind of look to it, but everything is very sharp and very like blurred and grained, but then kind of switch this very 70s earthy kind of, you've got thick like speckles on the film type of thing. um so yeah, post production, I think that was definitely my favorite. Why I still consider that, even though it didn't turn out what I wanted it to be, I still consider that like a valuable experience, because I it really just let me sink into more like the history of film and trying to figure out what it is that I actually wanted to tell, like the substance, like the fabric of it. That sort of exploitation film, like pulp with purpose, which is a term I've been saying since. um, yeah, but it was definitely an interesting one.
I love it. I love it. Where can people find some of their projects to check out and, get that experience for themselves? Do you have them
Oh,
anywhere online?
yeah, I've just stuck them on YouTube, so I can send over a link to the YouTube channel. I'm not sure if everything I've done is on there, because there's a lot of like storyboard concept stuff as well, because Short Tooth, even though it has a complete form, it's still like a very hodgepodge type thing. But I'll make sure to see if that's actually on there. But yeah, I'll link the YouTube, and Stranger to Me and Pretty in Private are on there.
All right. We'll get those links and put them in the description so everyone can check those films out. All right. So now let's get into Pretty in Pink. This one was interesting because I like the style, the character, and just the way it was whole set. Even the shots. The shots were amazing as well. Um, I don't want to give too much away. It's your film. I'll let you have the floor with this one. So Pretty in Private. How did you come up with the concept for that? And where did that inspiration for that come from?
Okay, so yeah, there's a journey with it. So So just a bit of background. So like the log line for this would be essentially like a young guy sort of dares himself to step out into the big wide world, sort of in his skirt and heels, thinking that he's alone, but lo and behold, when he realizes, much too late, that he's not as alone as he thought he was, effectively getting caught in this sort of state. Um, yeah, the actual story of it actually comes from something that like actually did happen. So again, shortly after Stranger to Me, I was very much like trying to overcome and trying to pinpoint my own identity to some extent. And I think that what I was looking for was something that kind of that felt like whatever was on the inside was, you know, verbalized, expressed to some extent, even if it was new. And I didn't really have like a definitive name for it. It was just, there was a feeling that lingered here, and I was just sort of experimenting. So the actual story of this guy kind of almost using taking the trash out as an excuse to kind of walk out into the real world in this sort of form is something I used to do. I used to walk like across like my so we lived in like a big square, like a fenced off a gated square, like an annex. And I would literally walk from, outside my block all the way across this like big parking bit to the bin store and back, usually like late at night or really early in the morning, um, just because I was just trying to figure myself out and trying to figure like what is this feeling, what is this feeling of existence that I feel deserves to have more validity within me. um so that's where the story actually comes from, something I used to do. The inspiration to actually make the film is very different, because so basically I was scrolling through social media one day and I happened across this micro short program, and it was literally just asking to submit a one-page script with like a pitch and a one pager that had a sort of queer identity, and yeah, just sort of submit it. And like I think it was like 6 or 7 of the scripts would be selected to be then made in the program. And it was like specifically for, I think the course was called Real Queer. So it was like an incentive to make these 7 queer centered films. So I looked at it as a bit of like a challenge, like a brief of like, well, I want to enter this. What is it that I could dig out and then submit? So I chose that just because I was like, I mean, I could tell it in a minute or minute or two. Why not? It's definitely a valid story. So then I just initially I wrote it just to kind of complete the brief, and then the more and more I worked on it, the more and more frightened I got because it was cutting a lot to the like very close to the bone, and I think at the time I was very apprehensive to not only tell the story but like make it clear that it was very much my story. So like I needed that disconnect at the time, and I was really struggling to have it. But yeah, once I kept working on it, I think I thought, okay, I this is a good story. I can see it in my mind. I think it would look good, and I just felt like, again, the queer coding history that I did on Stranger to Me, and the kind of you know the silent film era, because a lot of the queer coded stuff, I mean, it extends throughout the history of film, really. But I remember like watching the documentary for Celluloid Closet, and a lot of it was like silent films, like the booming Hollywood era. Um, so I just felt like it needed to be a silent film. But if it was going to be a silent film, it wouldn't be like just monochrome with a bit of. I wanted to make it like 1920s. I wanted to make it like really like. really as authentic as you could get, because ultimately, like, you know, the story the of the thing is very much about a very internal feeling, and you know, coupled with the music as well, that kind of has its own flow. It's not like a consistent structure. It kind of like moves as this character moves on this literal journey. It just it couldn't feel more like a silent film if it tried.
Awesome, awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, the film was a great film. Good choice selection. Yeah, and the elements that you put in it, you used your own experience, more like a self-discovery. And that can be difficult for filmmakers to tap into, and you was able to tap into that, and that's awesome. So, what's next for Michael?
What's next? Oosh. Well, I think that, you know, the intention is to still try and make stuff. I think, you know, it's it's always a bit of a waiting game when, you know, because I still consider myself starting out, and you know, I've made some stuff, but you know, it's always a waiting game for the next one. But you know, I have I have things in mind. You know, it's whittling away.
All right, well, everyone, if you want to follow Michael, remember we're going to put that link in the description. Check out the films that he made, and the upcoming films will be on there as well. Michael, any?
As soon,
All right,
I was gonna say, yeah. As soon as I've got something, I'll let you know.
awesome, awesome. All right, everyone, that was our episode of Insight Plug. If you love what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave some comments down below so we can find out what you think. Let us know how can we improve the show, or let us know some ideas that we can bring to the table. All right, this has been Devon Jones. Michael, once again, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on. It's been good.
All right, this has been an episode of Inside Plug. Remember, stay inspired and keep creating. Devon Jones signing out.
Awesome.